Hey man, we're back. Here we go. Here's the graph of y equals sine of x. If you look, the period, which is where it starts to repeat its cycle, it goes up, down, back to the center. So it starts cycle 2 right at 2 pi. That's our period. Remember, amplitude is the height from the center. So if this is our center line right at 0, the highest up this one goes is 1. And it goes down 1 as well, but remember amplitude, you just take the absolute value. So if it goes up 1 and down 1, our amplitude is 1. What part of the graph did the 2 impact here? So if you look, it's y equals 2 sine of x. So it still has a period of 2 pi, right? That's where it starts repeating. But the difference here is it goes up to positive 2 and it goes down to negative 2. So that affected the amplitude. And that's because the a, remember the a is in front of the sine or cosine, because a equals 2. Great. Let's scope out another one here. Oh, two more? My goodness. So this one's y equals sine 2x. So in this case, the b is 2. So the amplitude is still 1, right? It goes up 1, down 1. But you'll notice that the period here, one cycle, repeats at pi. So this affected the period because the b equals 2. Now, eventually, you're going to have to come up with equations for these graphs. So remember that the period, you always do 2 pi divided by b. So if we knew that the period was pi, we'd say pi equals 2 pi over b. You can do the old switcheroo with the pi and the b. So b would equal 2 pi over pi, which that would help us figure out that b equals 2. But I mean, they gave it to us. But eventually, we're going to have to figure that out. Now, if you look at this one, it's a little stretched out a little more. So one cycle, one period is 4 pi in this case. Given this is sine, what do you think is the equation of this graph? So we're going to need to figure out, well, the a is 1 because it just goes up 1 and down 1 from the center. So we could say y equals sine, right? There's going to be just a 1 in front of that, which we don't have to write. Now this might affect, well, it will, it's affected by the period, which affects that b. So it's going to be something between the sine and the x. Now we need to figure out what that is. So we say, again, look over here, period is 2 pi divided by b. And we know that the period is 4 pi. So we'd say 4 pi equals 2 pi over b, which means that b equals 2 pi over 4 pi. The pi's will cancel. 2/4 reduces to 1/2. So b equals 1/2. So we have sine of 1/2 x. Not bad, yeah? Yeah, all right. Ooh, cosine. So remember, cosine starts at the top, then it dips to the middle, bottom, middle, top. Whereas sine goes middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. So here's our cosine. The period again is 2 pi. Sine and cosine, their period is both 2 pi. The amplitude here goes up 1 from the center and down 1 from the center, so our amplitude is 1. Now if you look at this one, cosine of x plus 3. It took all these points, right? This one hovered around 0 as the center line. The center line of this one, if you look, is 3. Huh! So everything in cosine was shifted up 3 units. So we've done transformations like this before. If it says plus or minus at the end, that's a vertical transformation, vertical translation. What part of the graph did the 3 impact? Y. Vertical shift up 3. Great. Oh, down here. Is it the same thing? Yeah. Cosine of x. Oh, okay, they're just shown for comparison here. So if you look here, it is grouped in with the x, which I remember from our quadratic graph shifts. When it's grouped with the x, that becomes a right and left translation. Now, if this says minus 3 pi, my head always goes backwards with these. So if it's minus, we have to shift it right that many units. So this one is going to shift the graph of cosine to the right 3 pi. So if you look starting at 3 pi, which is here, that would be the start of our cosine graph. So everything is shifted to the right 3 pi. Shifted right 3 pi. So we're going to be combining all these transformations. If it says plus or minus and it's not grouped with the x, it's going to be a vertical shift. If it is grouped in parentheses with the x, that is a horizontal shift. Okay, so we have the amplitude out in front. We have the b, which changes the period. That's between sine or cosine and x. And now we have these vertical and horizontal translations. Maybe we'll have all of them. Ooh! Ooh. Given this is cosine, what do you think is the equation of this graph? Now remember, cosine starts at the top. So in this case, the top of the graph is right here at 0. And usually, cosine is at positive 1. So we know that this has been shifted down 1 unit. Or you can find the center line, and the center line here is at -1. So, okay. Let's see, what else? Let's figure out what 1 period is. Well, I see that, let's see, it starts at 1 pi, and then it repeats at 3 pi. So the period is 2 pi. Cool. And remember, that's affected by b, so our b is just going to be 1 in this case. The amplitude, it goes up 1 and down 1, so the amplitude is 1. So we see it's going down 1, but it's also shifted. It's starting to the right. It starts here at 1 pi. All right, we have all the information we need here. Our a is 1, so it's going to start off y equals cosine of x. Well, cosine, and then if the period were to change, which it didn't, that would be our b, so that would be between the cosine and the x. But we have a horizontal translation. It is shifted to the right pi units. So if it is shifted right, we're going to say minus pi. That gets grouped with the x, the right and left. Now the vertical one, that comes after the parentheses with the x. This is shifted down 1 unit, -1. Fantastic. OMG. Here's y equals sine of x, and here is y equals negative sine of x. Now this one looks like it's stretched vertically, but that's just the scale of the graph. You'll see the amplitude is still 1. It's still going up 1 and down 1. It's just not to the same scale as the original graph. So that could throw you off a little bit. The only difference here is the negative in front. Now this one starts center, top, center, bottom, center. This one starts in the center, but then goes down, back to center, up, back to center. So this is just a reflection. Really, I guess you could say it impacts the A, but really it's just reflected. Is it at the bottom of that page? Yeah. All right, pulling it all together. I believe this is, okay, now we're gonna write some equations. So they look the same, except one just says sine, one says cosine. A is the amplitude, and if negative, it is reflected. B, again, affects the period. So period is going to be 2 pi divided by b. H, if you look, is the one that's grouped in with it. That is your horizontal translation. If it says minus h, that goes to the right. If it says plus h, that would go to the left. And the last one, k, that's our vertical transformation or translation. And that one makes sense. If it's plus, you go up. If it's minus k, you go down. So that one's pretty easy for me to remember. I always get confused on the horizontal ones, and I have to remember it's the opposite of what I would usually think. Here we go. Write an equation for the graph described. The graph, write an equation. Oh, okay. The graph of y equals 1/3 cosine 2x shifted up 4 units. Remember, the vertical shift comes at the end. So all we have to do is put a plus 4 at the end of this. So y equals 1/3 cosine 2x, and then the plus 4. Now, if they were asking other things about this equation, the 1/3 would be the amplitude. So it would go up 1/3, down 1/3. The 2 would affect the period, so you'd have to calculate period equals 2 pi over 2, and 2 pi divided by 2 is pi. So the period here is 1 pi. They're not asking any of this stuff, but eventually you will have to know this stuff. All right, number 2, the graph of y equals 8 sine 1/2 x shifted left 4 units. Remember, the horizontal translation gets grouped in parentheses with the x. So we'll start the same way, y equals 8 sine 1/2, and then we're going to group this with the x. It is shifted left, so we're actually going to say plus 4, like that. And the graph of y equals 2/3 cosine 3x reflected over the x-axis. Remember, the reflection, you just make the a negative. So y equals negative 2/3 cosine 3x. Nice! That's it. Oh, it's kind of sad. I'm kind of sad that it's over.